Hello and welcome back to part 2 of the lesson, The Day of Your Exam. This is the Project Management PrepCast and I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. In part 1, we discussed the actions that you should take in the days running up to the exam. Now in part 2, we cover the exam day itself and a few things to remember after the exam. Anxiety may be mounting and hopefully this lesson can help reduce that. You may want to make a checklist of the items that you need to take with you when you take the exam and make sure that they are in an easily accessible spot so you can pick them up before you leave. First, you need documentation. For most folks, it is a printout of 2 emails. You should have received an email from PMI that states that you are eligible to take the PMI certification examination. It contains your eligibility ID and other details like the eligibility expiration date and the language the exam should be administered in. After you scheduled your exam, you should also have received an appointment confirmation email with details from the Prometric Testing Center about the day and time of your exam. Next, remember to bring your government-issued ID that has English characters, your signature, and your photo. If your government-issued ID is missing a signature or photo, you can use a secondary type of ID to support the missing elements. The primary forms of accepted government IDs are a valid driver's license, a valid military ID, a valid passport, or valid national identification cards. But if your government-issued identification does not include a photograph or a signature, you need a secondary piece of ID that does include the missing piece. These include a valid employee ID, valid credit card with a signature, or a valid bank card, an ATM card. The forms of ID that are not valid include social security cards, student ID cards, and library cards. The names on the PMI documentation, as well as the name on your government identification, must match. In my case, none of my IDs actually showed the same name as on the notification, so I stopped by at the test center about 10 days before the exam and talked to the people there to see if this would be a problem. It wasn't, and it worked out fine, but I checked. Would you like to know what happens if you don't bring valid identification? Here is what Roman Narcisco told us what happened when he forgot to bring proper ID. He writes, "You know what? I almost missed the exam because I did not bring valid primary ID. I just brought my social security card and company ID. According to the test administrator, PMI does not recognize those IDs as primary IDs. The primary identification they want is a driver's license or a passport." Luckily, I came more than 1 hour early to the testing site, so I called my wife to bring my passport. Well, how lucky for him that his wife was available for this. And by the way, PMI also clearly says that if you cannot take the exam because of a missing ID, then you have to reschedule and pay the full re-examination fee. Lesson learned: bring 2 valid forms of ID. And then there are some items that you may want to bring that PMI doesn't mention at all. Wear comfortable clothes. In fact, wear something that you have owned for some time. You want to make sure, for example, that you don't wear a brand new shirt that you have never worn before. You know, it might have a new tag in the back and then it scratches you in your neck for the whole 3 or 4 hours that you take the exam. Not a good situation. However, you also don't want to dress too heavy or too light. Yes, you can wear a sweater into the exam room, but you cannot take it off. You're not allowed to take it off while you're in the exam room. And you can also not take an extra sweater in with you without wearing it. The test center that I was at had headsets to keep out the noise. However, I still recommend that you bring your own earplugs. You know those little foamy things that you can squeeze together and stick into your ears? But don't bring anything with cords that looks like it could be plugged into something. It's always nice to have earplugs because there is noise in the testing room. You also might want to eat a light meal before you sit for the test. You cannot take any food or drink into the test area. And you might also make sure that you have some snacks and a bottle of water for after your exam. Maybe an energy bar, a banana, or whatever quick snack that does not need refrigeration you'd like to bring. But be aware that you are not allowed to take anything to the desk where you take the actual exam. The testing centers do have lockers for anything that you cannot take into the testing area. So snacks, glasses cases, cell phones, wallets, foods and drinks all have to stay outside. You are going to want to travel light on the day of your exam and only bring what you really need. Here are some items that you don't have to bring. First of all, don't bring a calculator. The exam is computer-based, so you can use the built-in calculator for any formula-based questions that you may encounter. You should also be able to ask for a desktop calculator if you prefer, but no guarantee that all testing centers have those. Don't bring any electronic devices like any type of phones, smartwatches, tape recorders, video cameras, pagers, MP3 players. Strictly prohibited. You don't even have to bring a pen, pencil, or paper. The testing center provides that. In my case, they gave us 2 yellow sheets of paper that you have to return after the test. I heard of test centers that give you 1 piece, some give you an unlimited supply. And when it comes to what you cannot bring to the testing center, please see the certification handbook as well as the Prometric website. They have a complete list of items not to bring. Another lesson learned from Roman Narcisco's account is that you want to arrive early. PMI recommends that you should arrive 30 minutes early to sign in. However, go ahead and arrive 1 hour early. This is an important exam, and this is just one more thing you can do to minimize problems. And why do I recommend 1 full hour? Here's the story of a student from Egypt for you. Unfortunately, the Prometric Testing Center in Cairo had been moved to another location, different from where I had taken my 2 prior exams. I did not notice the new address in the confirmation email sent before the 3rd attempt. There was a heavy traffic the day of the test, in addition to no car parking near the new address. Finally, I reached the testing center with only a few minutes left. The check-in process for the exam is about the same as getting in on an airplane these days, except you have no carry-ons. The testing center administrator greets you as you sign in, checks your identification and documentation. You may also have some other forms that they will ask you to fill out and sign. Expect to have to wait for some time during the check-in process. Use this time to look around and maybe peek through the window into the testing area where other people are already sitting and taking their exams. Get comfortable with the testing center and the process by observing how the representatives treat and deal with other exam takers. You may also want to go to the bathroom. The administrator then asks you to empty your pockets and store all items in a locker. The testing center administrator will ask you to roll up your sleeves, and he or she scans you with a metal detecting wand to make sure that you are not hiding anything on your body. Some centers have even asked for people to lift their pant leg up too. At one point, your name is then called, and the representative walks you to your exam desk and helps you get set up. And while they are walking you over to your desk, take a look around and note that video recording is in progress in the testing center. And no, you're not auditioning to be a movie star here. This is, of course, intended to discourage any form of cheating. While I don't have any personal first-hand reports about people trying to cheat, there are some tales floating around of people who have tried to cheat and got caught. But these are just that, tales which may or may not be true. But the video cameras, they are true, and they are there and they are running. Here's a quote from a student about the video cameras. I was nervous looking at the setup at the Prometric Institute. The entire thing was being video recorded and made me a bit uneasy, but within the first 10 minutes, I got used to it. Therefore, Be aware that Prometric videotapes you taking the exam, but also remember that you'll probably forget about it as soon as the exam gets going. If you carefully read the certification handbook, you may have seen that the examination, answer sheets, worksheets and/or any other test or test-related materials remain the sole and exclusive property of PMI. These materials are confidential and are not available for review by any person or agency for any reason. This means that the note paper that Prometric provides is not to leave the test area with you. In fact, if you need more paper, they may confiscate the papers you have already used before giving you more. So, you walked in, saw the video camera, sat down at the exam desk, and it now means it's time to look at the exam timeline and see what happens next. The exam itself is preceded by a tutorial. Some students have reported back that the person who walked them to the desk had clicked the button to start the tutorial, but others, myself included, we were just told to start the tutorial ourselves when we are ready. You really won't know until you get there and sit down. PMI says that the tutorial takes about 15 minutes, but most people go through this in 5 to 7 minutes. The time the tutorial takes, by the way, does not count against your exam time. Use the time the tutorial offers also to get comfortable and calm down a bit. Your pulse is probably racing by this time, and you want to relax somewhat before you start the actual exam. The tutorial is optional, but I strongly recommend that you go through the complete tutorial and pay close attention to how things work in the exam. After all, you want to know how to take the exam the right way. One important thing to know and remember is that you are not allowed to write anything down yet. PMI and Prometric have made it very clear that writing anything down prior to when the exam has actually started will result in immediate exam failure. So leave that pen and paper alone for now. However, once the exam starts, you are allowed to use the pen and paper they gave you and write things down. This is the moment when some write down their brain dump sheet. Yes, this is going to eat up some of your exam time. However, spending a moment of your actual exam time in the act of getting everything you memorized onto paper will additionally give you some confidence in your exam knowledge. And you now have a physical reference to go back to during the heat of the exam. Then you have a set exam time to answer the questions. For example, you have 4 hours to go through all the questions on the PMP exam, and it's 3 hours for both the CAPM or PMI ACP exam. And even though emotions are still high during this time, you should feel pretty comfortable that you can get through this. After all those hours of studying and practicing exam questions, you're sure to come out victorious. By the way, the exam clock never stops, and there are no scheduled breaks for you. It's okay for you to take a break, and many do take a short break at one point or another, but you have to be aware that if you take a 7-minute break, that means you have 7 minutes less time for your exam. There's a countdown timer on the screen, as you have seen, so you always know how much time is left. If you do take a break, keep your ID and documentation with you because they are required to get back into the room. Also, prepare yourself for the fact that there is activity around you in the testing area because the exams start at different times and not all of them take several hours. People are always coming and going in the room, so be prepared for movement and noise around you. After you are done with the exam, either by clicking End Exam or when your time has run out, the system proceeds to a survey. Again, PMI says that this survey takes about 15 minutes and it doesn't count against the exam time. According to PMI, the survey is optional and it helps PMI to learn about your exam experience. However, even though they write it's optional, we've heard stories from exam takers who said that in their system, it was mandatory. And then after what seems like an eternity, your exam report shows up on the screen and you will instantly know your result. But before you get to that report, here is something that might happen to you. When the very first question of your exam is displayed, you might read it and think to yourself, I have no idea what the answer is. So you click the mark button and you move on to the next one. No problem, right? Question 2, same thing, don't know. Question 3, same thing, don't know. And now you're beginning to wonder, my God, don't I know any of the answer? Don't worry about this. There are going to be sets of questions that you don't know at first. I think the longest series of questions where I didn't immediately know the answer was 4 in a row. All you have to do in such an instance is to keep your cool, mark them and move on. Don't be like the person in the picture here and let the exam get to you. I promise, eventually a question that you can answer will appear. That builds your confidence, and then you can back to answering the questions you didn't know at first. Many students wonder if the time allowed to take the exam is enough. Well, that depends entirely on the individual taking the exam, on you and how you use the available exam time. Generally speaking, if English is your mother tongue, then you should finish the exam faster than someone like myself who had to learn English as a second language. And of course, if you are like me and you feel sick during the exam because you ate some strange food, there is just enough time probably. But in the end I did pass, and considering that I was really sick and still passed the exam should show you that any person who studied, prepared properly and didn't eat strange foods should be able to pass a PMI exam. But that doesn't mean it's easy or you will have hours to spare. Here is the lesson learned from Diane Falcone, who barely had enough time. She writes, I wanted to update you and let you know that I took my PMP exam yesterday at a Prometric testing center, and they did not allow you to write anything down until after the tutorial had ended and you had started the test. In fact, the rules were that you would be immediately removed if you did that. Additionally, I spoke to someone prior who had already taken their exam, and he warned me that the test takes the whole time, and he regrets using 15 minutes to write down his brain dump. I took that warning to heart and did not do a full brain dump, except for writing the process groups and knowledge areas charts, which took me 3 to 4 minutes. In the end, I was trying to get through the test as fast as I could, so I did not run out of time, which is not necessarily a good place. But I had no choice. I ended up having 2 minutes left to review only a few questions. I wish the reality of this would be shared. Instead, I'm reading everywhere that there will be time left over to review your questions, and you will have time for a 5-minute break, and so on. The reality is, they make you go through the rigors of the security check again, which takes 5 minutes on its own before re-entering the testing area, even if you just take a bathroom break. So I did not take any breaks, and if I had, I would not have finished in time. I'm requesting that the reality of this test-taking experience would be expressed on your tips for taking the exam so that everyone knows what they are really up against. I gratefully passed and even hit above target on 3 knowledge areas. However, I had a very different idea of what types of environmental changes I would be up against, as well as the test taking the full time, with just about no time to review, and I really would have liked to have been privy to that information as I prepared for the test. As you can see from Diane's account, taking a PMI exam can indeed be hard, and she had challenges to overcome that she did not expect to be up against, but she prevailed. I can only imagine how frustrating it must have been for her to have all these unexpected challenges thrown at you at such a crucial moment, but she focused on what was important and passed. Now let's contrast Diane's experience to what Apurva Revankar writes. He says, I started the exam, and one by one the questions seemed very tricky. I was marking almost every second or third question to answer later. I started to freak out and I was losing my mind. It was getting difficult to understand the scenarios in the questions. So I stopped and relaxed for a few minutes and told myself, "You can do this." I completely relaxed and went over the questions calmly. It started getting better and I was in a much better position. I started to recognize the unwanted sections in the questions and targeted only the required section. This helped to solve many questions. I had around 45 minutes at the end to review the marked questions, and even those started to make sense during the second time around. I was finally content and ended the exam after 4 hours. I was highly relieved to see above target score. I literally cried out of joy. This is obviously quite a different account from what Diane wrote, and both of them are right because that is the experience they had. It is very personal. My recommendation to you is that you must know yourself. Recognize negative patterns when you are getting nervous or apprehensive. Don't let outside challenges that you didn't expect get to you. And when you do notice that in yourself, you have to make a conscious decision to take a step back and relax. Eventually, the exam and survey are done and you see your report and you passed. It's only natural that you are excited and that you want to just run outside and do a little dance and call everyone and let them know. But that's not what you are going to do. Instead, what you will do is calmly go outside of the testing room, maybe with a little bit of extra swagger, and speak to the people at the front desk. They were probably the first ones to congratulate you on passing the exam. They also take you through the checkout procedure. Now, here comes the most important part. Do not leave the testing center without a printed exam report. Let me repeat that. Do not leave the testing center without a printed exam report. This is because the printed exam report is your only proof that you have passed the exam. The chances that you need it as proof are minute, but consider the plight of another student of ours who took his exam in a testing center that was scheduled to be decommissioned the very next day. His electronic exam results were lost in the process. However, since he had the printed exam report, he was able to prove to PMI that he had passed his exam and he is now certified. Now you can go outside and scream for joy. However, be careful what exactly you scream. You cannot scream "the third question asked" and then you recite the question and list the answer choices word for word. You cannot discuss the details of exam questions with anyone. When you submit your PMI application, you agree to abide by the PMI certification application and renewal agreement, which you can find in the handbook and the PMI website. Among other items, this agreement addresses post-exam questions and discussions. It says, "I agree not to discuss, debrief or disclose in any manner the specific content of PMI examination questions and answers to any individual." With this, PMI makes it clear to you that you cannot talk about the detailed questions on your exam, and if you do, then you could lose the certification that you have just earned. After seeing that statement, you may be asking yourself, well, what can I discuss about the exam? That's easy. You can give general impressions like that the exam was harder or easier than you expected, or that there were no questions on the exam that really surprised you, or that you are glad that you went to the testing center a week before to check it out. You can discuss the topics that you came across on the exam in a general manner. For example, you could recommend to other students that it's really important that they know the earned value formulas, but based on your experience, they really don't need to know a lot about project portfolio management. Or you can say that the questions you saw on the exam simulator that you purchased from me, Cornelius Fichtner, are very close to what you saw on your actual exam. Oh, and Thank you very much for saying that. And of course, you can, in fact, you should write and publish your lessons learned. Your lessons learned is a more or less detailed account of how you studied and your experience with the exam. You can go into minute detail in regards to how and what you studied and how long it took you and what you found surprising about the process and the studies. You can discuss all the books you read, but of course, you have to leave out any details about the specific content of questions that you came across in your exam. And then, of course, tell the whole wide world that you are now certified. Tell your boss about how much more valuable you are now, but don't necessarily expect an immediate raise. Update your LinkedIn, Facebook, and other social media accounts. Update your resume, and do go to your next PMI chapter meeting locally and tell them it feels really good when you get to stand up in front of your peers and everyone applauds for you. And don't forget to tell us. If you write to support@pm-prepcast.com, then we can add you to the list of our successful students, and who knows, we may even ask you to be featured in our next student profile. Oh, and also, do take the evening off and relax. Now, as we wrap up this lesson, here are some takeaways. Remember what you need to take with you to the exam. Government-issued picture ID with signature. You may need a secondary ID if your government ID does not have a signature and picture, and the PMI documentation that proves you are eligible to take the test. Otherwise, take very little. Prometric supplies with what you need. You can bring a snack for after you test, and you might bring a sweater in case it's cold. But remember, you cannot take your sweater off in the exam room. Do not run off without your exam results. You may want to safeguard those in case something between Prometric and PMI goes haywire. Then, of course, you can brag to the world about getting those letters behind your name. But remember that specific information about the test is confidential and you cannot divulge it. And finally, expect the unexpected. No matter how many positive or not so positive lessons learned you are going to read, your experience will be different. You'll have a story to tell of how your exam went, and please do tell it so that others can be prepared. I wish you all the best of luck on your exam. Until next time.